Today, I'm gonna go over how I like to look at my run data. .55 miles, 8 minutes, 22 seconds per mile, and 148 beats per minute on average today. Today, what I wanted to do is go over how I look at my data on a couple of different places where I can look at my data and just kind of let you guys know what are the numbers that I'm really paying attention to, what are the ones that I kind of don't really pay all that much attention to, and how do I like to kind of look at it. Now, before I get into that, I do want to go over some disclosures. Today, I'm going to be talking about data not only in Strava, but also in the Polar Flow app. And the watch that I'm using, the Polar Vantage V2, was a watch that was sent to me for the purpose of review back when I initially received it and reviewed it from Polar, so I didn't have to pay for that watch. But they're not paying me to make this video. They don't know that I'm making this video. And they're not going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before this video goes up on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the run data. So here's what it kind of looks like in Strava, and I think this is what probably most people are familiar with. But what today's run was, and I mean, and let's look down. If you look at the splits, you can kind of see like what was the pace, what was the grade adjusted pace, and what was the elevation. If you guys see me like pointing down here or looking down here, that's where my computer. So that's what I'm doing, and you can see kind of like overall the elevation, and that's probably how most people are looking at it. And you can even see further, clicking on or off pace or the grade adjusted pace or what the heart rate was or what the cadence was through all this. You can get a glimpse and a little bit more detail in terms of what was going on in the run that you might not get just from this basic number of like 40 feet of elevation gain during mile number 2, for example. This gray area, kind of shaded area on the bottom along this graph is like the elevation profile of the run. And I think one of the things to keep in mind when you're looking at something like this is you want to be looking at it when you have a watch that has an altimeter in it. A lot of other watches that don't have and I think a lot of watches these days do have altimeters, but if you have one that doesn't, it might be pulling data from GPS. So like it correlates with that GPS location, what was like the altitude that corresponds to that. Out here where I am in New Vienna, Iowa, it probably would have been fine even if I didn't have an altimeter. But like when I'm in like the city, when I'm in Chicago, that gets really weird really fast just because there's buildings and stuff like that. So like this wouldn't be that accurate if I was looking at it from the city, but with unless I had an altimeter like I do with the Polar Vantage V2. Here's what the elevation profile was for this run. It's pretty hilly. There's not a lot of like very long flat stretches around here in eastern Iowa, despite like the reputation that Iowa might have. I mean, I'm not saying it was like mountainous. The total elevation gain for this run was, where is it? Up here. It is, let's find it. I can always find it really easily when I'm looking. Oh, here we go. I always find it easily on the phone because that's when I normally look at Strava. But 548 feet of elevation gain, so not a ton. But even beyond this particular run was a workout. It was a 3 by 10 minute threshold workout. And so I'd like to know a little bit more detail in terms of what was going on in here. And I've already written it out for the comments that for those 3 sections, I was trying to run around my threshold pace, which I'd set for somewhere around like 260 watts. For me, I run with a Stride foot pod. I like to use power, but it also corresponds to about 165 to 170 beats per minute with 3 minutes of rest in between each of those reps. And this is kind of like how, like here is like the workout I've laid out what I wanted to do, and then here is like kind of like how it ended up working. And those are kind of like the 3 main things that I'm looking at just when I want to just get a quick glance at how did those 10-minute sessions go. But there's further detail that I can get to it, and for that I really like to go to the Polar Flow app. And so I'm going to do that, and I'll go to the activity for today. pulling it up here. Now I'm showing you guys everything on my laptop, but I'm having some problems with some of my screen capture software, so it might be a little bit laggy today. Hopefully, there's nothing that I'm doing that's going to really require like intricate timing, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem. So with the Vantage V2, like the default it gives you is to give you like this hill splitter thing, which is interesting, but not super useful to me all the time. But instead, what I want to look at for today is phases. Now, what I had done is I'd set up like a scheduled workout where it would give me like, I did a 3-mile warm up and then 10 minutes on, 3 minutes off, 10 minutes on, 3 minutes off. And so without me having to like manually click a button to like switch over or to demarcate where one part ended and the next one began, it would automatically click over for me. For these like 10-minute thresholds, a lot of times, sometimes I'll do a phased workout. I'll set it up. I'll go through the effort to do that. Not that it's that tough, but sometimes I'll do that. Other times I might just rely on clicking the watch. If it gets to be faster than that, like I've been doing some workouts that are like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, that just goes by so quick. I like to have like the watch click over for me because otherwise my rest periods get too long or my work periods get too long and the workout gets all messed up. But having done like the phased workout, as I was going through it, it would automatically go to the next session. And you can see here that these phases, I got the warm up, 3 miles, work, 10 minutes. Here's the heart rate zone intensities that I'd set up. Then the rest, 3 minutes, work, rest, and rest. And I can keep going down. And then the cool down was 3 miles. And I had just like a little bit left at the end. To get back home to make it a full loop. And so the things that I'm really looking for when I'm looking at these, and I can click on each one of these ones individually. Let me go back before I do that. Like when I look at it, the data in Polar, I get kind of like the same things that I was looking at Strava. Sometimes this view is more helpful to me because everything's split out into its own graph. The way that Strava overlays things sometimes is a little bit more helpful. But this kind of gives me a quick at a glance of everything that I was kind of keeping track of. So there's the heart rate up here, then there's the paces down here, the watts that I was outputting. Not according, this watch can give me a watts number from the wrist, power from the wrist, but I was using my foot pod, so these are the numbers coming from the foot pod, and then cadence, and then again that altitude kind of graph. So I can kind of see like based on the altitude changes, how was my pace, how was my heart rate, that kind of thing. So we could take a look at that, and I could see pretty clearly here that like my heart rate was pretty much right in the zone that I wanted it to be for all these reps. So I'm getting like the benefit of the workout that I'm hoping. And I'm not sure though, because these power numbers are just jumping all over the place, what like the average kind of power number was. So that's like the main thing that I'm looking for. Did I do the workout as I was supposed to? So I can click on this work phase and then it'll give me averages for just that work phase. It was 10 minutes long, 1.44 miles, 115 feet of gain. The first one is a hilly one. And then 165 beats per minute on average, 658 per minute on average, and 270 watts on average, which makes sense because there was a lot of uphill. Like this one spot here, it gets pretty steep. It goes from, anywhere from 0 to 5, but usually in the 1 to 3% grade range, and then it goes down a little bit, but then it's just steadily like 1 to 2% up for like the rest of that entire interval. So it's a challenge, that one. And this one, like -3, -4% grade, that's like almost too fast for me to really take advantage of it. I'm kind of braking a little bit when I do that. I'm just not as talented of a downhill runner. So I like running downhill, I can do it forever, but I can't always take full advantage of the downhill like gravity effect for speed. But the other things that I can look at here, not only in the distance, in the heart rate average, I get that heart rate max, but then I can also look at this power average and also a power max. So maxed out at 332, which is probably when I was like just getting started up, like getting from slower pace, ramping up to faster pace quickly. Gives me a pace average and pace max, and then the cadence average and the cadence max. So I'm a little bit over 184. I'm at like 184 for the cadence average, which I don't really pay too much attention, but as long as it's staying somewhere near 180 for my work phases, I'm not too worried about it. I won't really think about it too much. We could look at work phase 2 and look at kind of like the same numbers and go back over here, and we got same thing, about 1.44 miles, about the same heart rate average, and then a lot lower for the power average. So This one, there was only 45 feet of ascent, and a lot of it was a little, I mean, there was still another very steep downhill in it, but then another, a little bit more of a gradual downhill that I could take a little bit more advantage of. This one I felt like, feeling wise, from my memory, I felt like I was kind of cruising a little bit on this one. And, it's kind of showing up in the power number. It's not quite as high as it's exactly what I was hoping for, but not as high as in the first one. And the pace average was 6:57 per mile. Not exactly the pace number that I'm hoping for at kind of my threshold level, but that's where my fitness is at right now. And then the max pace, the fastest I got during this phase was 5:43. It doesn't tell you how long you hit that. I wish I could kind of have that number, but it's not a number. It's not that important. It was probably on one of these downhill sections down here. And then the cadence average is 186. The way that Polar does it is they just do like every other foot. So then you have to double it to get to like the 180 or whatever that most people are familiar with. Then we can look at work number 3 and kind of look at the same numbers, 93 cadence average, pace average 654. So it's the fastest one that I did. This is my third one. The average power was 258 and the max power was 288. So that tells me I was more like in that central band that I wanted to be in. So I think a little bit more controlled, but also had 50 feet of ascent, but everything was really gradual here. And most of that ascent was right at the end. So I feel like I was able to be a lot more controlled on this one. This felt pretty easy relative to the first one as well, and so I'm actually surprised that it was the fastest one, but it is the one that feels like it has the most downhill on it as well. And the heart rate average 165 with the heart rate max bumping up to 170. I think that was the highest of all the reps. And then again, that makes sense because it's toward the end of the workout rather than the beginning of the workout, that it's taxing me a little bit harder, at least from a cardiovascular perspective. So that was the workout. The rests, what I generally look for in my rest periods is a power somewhere in, at least right now, in like 188 to like 200. So that's kind of what I'm hitting for all these. 183 is fine too. I don't really care too much as long as I'm still moving, and about what the power numbers are for that. The other way to look at it is what is your heart rate average. So I'd like to try to get to my heart rate, at least by the time I'm at the end of the rest phase, below kind of like, or in my zone 2, which is like 144 beats or so. And so this is, for the average is not there, but like if I look at where it is towards the end, the heart rates are getting, nice and low towards the end. So they're right in zone 2. So I can look at rest phase 2, same thing. The heart rate's nice and low, pretty easy down here at the bottom. And then let's look at rest 1. The heart rate is nice and low for the most part. And it didn't take me very long to get to recovered from that first rep, because again, it was the first rep. So that all makes a lot of sense. So that's basically how I look at it for when I'm looking at a workout. I think that the way that I can kind of divide up either in phases, or if I had manually lapped it, I'd be able to do a similar thing, and I like being able to do that. It gives me a little bit more detail than what I get in Strava. Now, that all being said, if I had manually lapped it, all that stuff shows up in Strava as well, so you don't necessarily need to have a Polar watch to be able to look at these things this way. Let's go look back at, I think, let's do this workout from last Monday. I think it was the same thing, and I did manual laps, so I'm getting that same kind of idea here, where it tells me lap 2, it was 3/4 of a mile. I did 6 5-minute threshold sections on the same route though. So I did, 5 minutes at 6:42. It kind of gives me that same information, but in the way that Strava does. It doesn't break out the average power for these, at least not that I'm aware of. So that's the one thing to keep in mind. If you are training by power, it doesn't necessarily show you that. But if you are using a power meter, like a Stride FootPod, that's the similar information that you can find in your Stride Power Center as well. So there's always lots of different ways that you can look at this kind of information. One thing that I've noticed is when you're using phased workouts, and this is for the Polar owners really only, if you're using a phased workout, it doesn't send this kind of nice and neat data to Strava. You'll have to look at it in Polar Flow, or if you have a FootPod, you have to look at it in the Stride Power Center. But if you're manually lapping over on your Polar watch, you'll get this if you set your run type to workout, because then it knows to like divide things up this way. So that's something that you can do. Now, the other thing that I wanted to do is show you how I look at just like a regular, like easy easy run as well. I normally don't spend too much time other than looking at like the base metrics, like the distance, what was the pace, and then what was my heart rate at the bottom. This one was just an easy run. There were some hills on this one too, but 11.88 miles on Monday, 9:18 per mile, a little bit of a recovery run, 758 feet of incline, so a little bit hillier than what I did for this run today. And again, you could see this was an out and back. I just turned around because a dog followed. Here's a dog. The dog followed me on this run. So normally half this route would be on dirt roads and the other half would be on a road. When the dog follows me, I just do an out and back so I don't have to take the dog on the road. I always try to return the dog home where I pick him up, but I don't pick him up. He follows me, but he never stays. So he runs as long as he feels like running with me, and then he leaves when he feels like leaving. But so I did the out and back, and so that's why it's like symmetrical here. And you can see here's the pace. The grade adjusted pace was 8:57 per mile, and telling me that it was kind of hilly on this route. And then the average cadence according to Strava here, I think the Strava is pulling data from the watch, is 172. It was an easy run, so it makes sense that it's not quite the 184, 186 that I was getting for a workout. This little spot right here where the cadence drops to like 0, that's where I stopped to pet the dog. He normally doesn't let me pet him, but he let me pet him on this particular day, so I stopped to pet the dog there. But you can see kind of that information there. And when I'm looking at just like a regular run, if I'm looking at it on Strava, I'm really only like kind of looking at the mile splits. That's the only main thing I care about. And I might care about like what are some of like the max heart rates. Like, is it getting out of control at any point? Like even coming up these giant hills, I'm getting up to 151, I could see on my heart rate, which is high, but within kind of the zone that I'm looking for an easy day run. So not terrible. I do try to keep under 145 for most of my easy runs, and I'm doing that for the most part, keeping it really nice and simple, just out there having a good time. If I look at that same run on the Polar website, it kind of just looks the same. I'm not getting too much different for just an easy run. Again, I'm mainly only looking to see, like, did I let my heart rate go up too high? How long was it too high? So the main thing, if I click on this more button, you can see my average pace according to this was 9 minutes 20 seconds. The average heart rate was 138 beats per minute, and it gives me a breakdown of like how long I spent in each of my zones for my heart rate as well. So like the main thing I'm looking at is like 10% of this run was higher than I wanted to be, but only by a little bit because that max heart rate wasn't that high. And a total of like 89% was in the range that I wanted for my heart rate for the day. So I consider that a successful easy run. Plus I got to pet the dog, so that was a plus. It gives you a breakdown of like what your incline and how much of it was flat. It says it was 66% flat. That run does not feel like it's 66% flat, I'll tell you that. It feels like there's a lot of climbing on that one. And I can look at, it does a hill splitter thing with at least some of the Polar watches. So it gives you a breakdown of how you're doing on the flats, hills, and uphills. So you can look at that kind of stuff individually if you're doing more specific hill training. I'm usually not, so I don't really use the hill splitter function all that much. I usually use the automatic laps, or I can split it into a lap distance of my choosing a different increment if I wanted to do that. So I might look at the automatic laps, and then I usually don't look at it in too much detail, but all that stuff that I looked at before, like the pace average, pace max, heart rate average, heart rate max, all that stuff is available on a mile per mile basis. And then I can even, drill down within each of those miles. And like, this is just the metrics for just that mile. And I can look at that. So I like that feature as well, just to be able to see like a zoom in of that like heart rate data versus the altitude versus the pace versus the cadence. I think that's pretty useful to look at, although I don't really look at cadence too much. So I think that's about it. That's like the basics of how I normally like to kind of look at the data, whether it's in Polar or in Strava. If you have any questions about that, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I'd love to answer any questions you have there, or better yet, feel free to stop by the live stream that I do just about every day here on YouTube, 3 p.m. Central Time. If you come today, Thursday's happy hour, so bring your recovery beverage of choice, non-alcoholic or alcoholic, and we'll all kind of just hang out and just chat. So hopefully I'll see you guys there. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. Hopefully staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?